Welcome to On the Other Hand. A while ago I was looking for something to listen to while doing yard work, so I put on this deep dive that picked apart the flat earth theory from a channel called Folding Ideas. But a half hour in, Folding Ideas had this to say while wrapping up his thoughts on flat earthers.
But, let's keep some perspective here. Flat Earth, for all the command it holds over our collective interest, is still a very small movement. The largest Flat Earth channels cap out around 150,000 subscribers, with most coming in well below that. And this is not much in the scope of YouTube, where the opportunity cost of subscription is extremely low. And for the last couple years now, newer pro-Flat Earth videos from these channels have mostly been skating by with a few thousand views. In fact, Mark Sargent, the guy largely credited with popularizing Flat Earth in the YouTube era, his videos used to get hundreds of thousands of views. His seminal work, Flat Earth Clues, has 1.1 million views. But he's only had 2 videos break 6 digits since the start of 2018. One that's just a bootleg repost of Shane Dawson's Flat Earth video, and one whinging about The Last Jedi. Now, YouTube notably has made some changes to the algorithm to prioritize credible sources, which lowers the ranking of Flat Earth videos even within their own sphere. But those changes were only implemented in early 2019, when Flat Earth was already on a downslope. More impactfully, whether it's debunking or merely profiling, mainstream channels talking about Flat Earth from an external perspective are just vastly more popular than actual Flat Earth content. So if you're watching Flat Earth videos, you are far, far more likely to be recommended mainstream videos with millions of views over evangelist videos with hundreds. The bottom line is that Flat Earth has been slowly bleeding support for the last several years. Because they're all going to Qanon.
That was quite the pivot. Folding Ideas does have a progressive bias that pops up from time to time in its videos, but the video was advertised as an apolitical topic. For those who don't know, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that has direct ties to politics, specifically tied to a discussion of the former president, Donald Trump. But whatever, I chose this video to hear a deep dive on a conspiracy theory, and I was curious enough to continue and hear his thoughts on such a politically charged topic. But I'd like to show a couple of highlights from the second part of this video and then discuss them. So Folding Ideas continues to talk about conspiracy theories as follows.
One of the oft-discussed elements of these types of groups is the way that fact-checking is often used as a kind of filter. So if you sit down to watch Asa Bard's Fall of the Cabal and you're the kind of person who is inclined to fact check and is curious about the world and is, interested in thinking for themselves and thinking about things analytically and from a scientific standpoint, you're probably not going to get very far into it because it comes out so fast and so quick with things that are going to make you pause and stop and gather your thoughts on explaining why they're wrong.
So he talks about how people who fact check or think for themselves tend not to get very far into conspiracy theories because it comes out so fast and so quick, the things that are going to make you pause and stop and gather your thoughts in explaining why they are wrong. A good and valid point, so hold on to that idea while we watch this short section talking about a notable subgroup in this conspiracy theory.
For example, a notable subgroup that QAnon has drawn in are unstable parents who are embroiled in custody battles, sometimes pre-existing and sometimes as a direct result of their involvement in QAnon driving their partners away. Someone who's already on really shaky emotional ground starts getting super into QAnon, it's all they want to talk about, and they begin to fixate on co-morbid anti-vax conspiracies or bleach treatment conspiracies, and they start giving their children bleach or put them on an all-meat diet.
So according to Folding Ideas, there are people who fixate on co-morbid vaccine conspiracies or bleach treatment conspiracies and start giving their children bleach. Let's also put a pin in that thought, and I'll show you the last highlight, where Folding Ideas talks about people grifting, or making money off of this conspiracy theory.
The COVID pandemic, already a source of anxiety and isolation for virtually everyone, has further accelerated the process, with the ranks being bolstered by more and more people who already subscribed to fringe medical or conspiratorial beliefs, who are deeply unstable, or who are just generally amenable to authoritarianism if they stand to benefit. And of course, grifters. So, so many grifters. Q has managed to attract all the normal types of grifters, from policy hacks who see the movement as a political body that they can try to steer to either bolster their own support or hurt their opposition, to pundits who benefit from the traffic Q brings in, to quick buck drop shippers, to regular old con men. In fact, whether you're looking to just make some cash selling Q-branded merchandise, or if you want to build an entire career on YouTube as a Q decoder, there's money to be made off QAnon.
So he suggests there are policy hacks who have tried to use the movement for their benefit, pundits who benefit from the traffic, and dropshippers and con men who have gotten involved. These are some fair and valid points Folding Ideas makes about conspiracy theories in general. But do you know what drives me crazy? He doesn't seem to have fact-checked or thought for himself on this topic. Let me show you what I mean. First off, do you remember that pivot from discussing flat earthers to QAnon that I showed at the start? When the claim was literally that the flat earth theory was losing steam because people were migrating to this new QAnon conspiracy theory? Do you remember how he highlighted and put into perspective how much relative traffic and how many channels flat earthers had? Now, guess how many comparable details he provided for QAnon, and how thoroughly he showed the connection between the two conspiracies. Spoiler alert, he showed nothing to link these two theories at all. It's just his own conjecture. He uses that claim in a hard pivot that he never bothers to substantiate in over 30 minutes of talking, nor does he ever show anything in a QAnon social media group that compares to the listed Flat Earth YouTube channels and numbers. Now, I'm fine if he just wanted to talk about conspiracy theories that bugged him, but one of the biggest problems with conspiracy theories is that people don't substantiate their claims. They just say stuff and expect you to believe it, which is ironically what Folding Ideas did here. Next, he went on to talk about fact-checking, curiosity, and thinking for yourself, and how that will keep you away from conspiracy theories. And then he says that a prominent group of QAnon believers are parents who fixate on co-morbid vaccine conspiracies or bleach treatment conspiracies and start giving their children bleach. Yet again, here Folding Ideas is citing examples of crazy things happening without having the curiosity to fact-check the claims he puts forward. And it's especially ironic because it seems like he got these claims from people grifting on the conspiracy theory. And remember, he specifically warns against listening to grifters. What do I mean? Well, references to bleach treatment conspiracies and giving the children bleach goes back to a comment Trump made while president during the early part of the pandemic as follows.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
So President Trump was discussing hypothetical treatments to COVID, of which he seems to have gotten from an experimental summaries of ongoing tests and scientific studies. Now, he did mention injecting a disinfectant in addition to things like hitting the body with a really powerful light, and he said doctors could check that out, and that it sounds interesting to him. Now, some outlets and political opponents who were grifting on the traffic COVID and Trump stories provided ran a whole bunch of statements and articles on how you shouldn't inject yourself with bleach even if Trump said so to fight COVID, which then turned into people talking about how you shouldn't drink bleach to fight COVID, and attributed that crazy idea to Trump. So to me, it's ironic the Folding Ideas, in highlighting a conspiracy theory that supposedly viewed Trump as some sort of prophet, faults people for believing things that Trump's opponent said that Trump said. So who's at fault if anyone actually did drink bleach? Is it the crazy conspiracy theorists, or is it the grifters who actually ran with and distorted the original statement? Because in my research, I couldn't actually find a single story about anybody drinking or injecting bleach because they heard it would fight COVID. It seems like it was a narrative spun up on an offhanded comment that never actually manifested itself. And maybe Folding Ideas has sources to show that such things happened. But again, ironically, for talking about conspiracy theories, he doesn't actually show or link to sources to back up these claims. Moving on to the co-morbid vaccine conspiracies that Folding Ideas also mentioned, I'd like to pull up some clips from a Viva Frei livestream that talks about how government health groups are now acknowledging the risks of the COVID shots. And sorry for the lower camera quality in this video. It was a livestream done on the road, so his internet connection and livestream setup was not up to its usual quality.
But this is what the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario is now saying. And they're going to pretend that they've always said it. They're going to pretend you did this to yourself. We never forced you to do anything. And I can't find the tweet now. Hold on. Let me just go back. Share screen. What's my problem? Wait until you hear what he has to say. And then we're going to parse it. We're going to break it down.
Why not just recommend it to everybody instead of saying it's a personal decision?
Because at present we're doing a risk-based approach.
What's the risk?
The risk, there's always a risk to having any therapeutic versus a benefit. You want to make sure there's a very strong benefit versus the risk. If we're an 18-year-old healthy individual, the risk to getting hospitalized if we have no underlying medical illness is very, very low. We know there is a risk, a very small risk, 1 in 5,000, that may get myocarditis, for example. And you'd have to have that discussion on the risk. A complication from the vaccine versus a benefit of decreased hospitalization for a young, healthy person.
Why not just recommend it to everybody instead of saying it's a personal decision?
Because at present we're doing a risk-based approach.
At present, we're doing a risk-based approach. That means prior to present, they were not doing a risk-based approach because they weren't. They were doing flat across the board mandatory. Mandate or lose your job. Fire healthcare workers who don't submit. Employers can fire. CBC has it as an employment requirement. CBC, the state broadcaster, has it as an employment requirement in their app, in their, what do they call them? Job postings on LinkedIn. I follow them just because they make me sick. But it gets worse.
What's the risk?
What's the risk?
The risk, there's always a risk to having any therapeutic versus a benefit.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Did you just call it a therapeutic? Let's play my montage now. It is becoming abundantly clear that people need to go to jail for what the government has done over the last 3 years. Let's just show you my montage.
I just recommend it to everybody instead of saying it's a personal decision.
Because at present we're doing a risk-based approach.
What's the risk?
The risk, there's always a risk to having any therapeutic, to having any therapeutic versus a benefit. You want to make sure there's a very strong benefit versus the risk. If we're an 18-year-old healthy individual, the risk to getting hospitalized if we have no medical illness is very, very low. We know there is a risk, a very small risk, 1 in 5,000, that may get myocarditis, for example. And you'd have to have that discussion on the risk benefit of a complication from the vaccine versus a benefit of decreased hospitalization.
Hold on 1 second. I still hear it in my ear and I have to shut the window properly. Here we go. A therapeutic.
Having any therapeutic.
There's always a risk to having any therapeutic. No, they're just, this is the chief medical officer of Ontario now referring to what people have been insisting is the big V. He's calling it the big T now. It's always been a therapeutic. It's always been a therapeutic. Now, once upon a time, people, this is from Forbes. Some are claiming COVID-19 vaccines are not vaccines. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not just hear the chief medical officer of Ontario, Kieran Moore, refer to it as a therapeutic? Not a vaccine? Do words mean nothing? It's preposterous. It's preposterous. And there's always a risk to having any therapeutic. 9 months ago, Forbes berating anybody who's wacky and out there enough to say, don't think of it as a vaccine. Think of it at best as a therapeutic. Oh, I'm sorry. Now, by the way, what happens now? Are we allowed quoting the chief medical officer? He's CMOH, Chief Medical Officer of Ontario. Are we allowed quoting that guy? Are we allowed repeating what Kieran Moore just said without getting yeeted from social media? And by the way, extremely rare circumstances of myocarditis, extremely small risk, 1 in 5,000. Let's just assume that that's the number. But I don't think, in my legal analysis, if they're coming back now and saying, yeah, it's not a V, it's a therapeutic, they're going to come back now and say, 1 in 5,000. I suspect in 6 months it's going to be 1 in less than 5,000. But let's just even operate on that number. 1 in 5,000 is a very small risk. I'm sorry. If 1 in 5,000 is a very small risk, what was the risk of hospitalization for teenagers in the first place from the Rona? Let me just see. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. It's infinitesimal. If 1 in 5,000 is a very small risk of myocarditis for a young and healthy individual, then how would you qualify the risk of COVID in and of itself for that same individual? Because I'll tell you one thing, I know it's more rare than 1 in 5,000.
I very much remember those who conflated the COVID shots with the one-and-done vaccines the kids take before entering public school. In fact, there are still those who conflate the flu-style shot therapeutics of COVID with actual vaccines, and those happen to be the same people who called co-morbid vaccine claims to be conspiracies. So get ready to say, my conspiracy theorist friends were right again, because this so-called conspiracy is actually the reality that some people, like Foley Ideas, try to discredit. Don't get me wrong, there definitely were and are lots of conspiracies floating around, but there's a whole lot of suppression, manipulation, and shaming of those who are curious, or who want to think for themselves. You know, the characteristics the Foley Ideas said would help you cut through the noise of conspiracy theories. Going back to this QAnon stuff, the craziest part to me is that in all this, I couldn't find any sort of solid numbers on how many people actually are QAnon believers. For the Flat Earthers, they have their YouTube channels, and they also have conventions where people physically go to show support, and seem to honestly back the idea of a flat Earth. But there seems to be no such tangible comparison to the QAnon crowd the Folding Ideas spent so much time addressing. So is it possible that a bunch of Flat Earthers became QAnon believers? It's possible. But is it also possible that policy hacks use the specter of a new political conspiracy theory for their benefit, and that political pundits in the news inflated the importance and pervasiveness of this and other movements in order to benefit from the traffic it provided? Yes, the answer is yes. This sort of fear-mongering definitely has happened, and is still happening. To paraphrase Common Sense Soapbox, there are a lot of insane theories out there, but just because Flat Earthers are a thing doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory is insane. And dismissing everything you disagree with as a conspiracy theory is just as crazy, if not crazier, than believing in the most crackpot theories yourself. As always, thanks, hope you enjoyed. And if you did, consider subscribing or joining me on Odyssey, a great YouTube alternative. Link is in the description.